I call Barry Coates.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Tēnā koe.
Okay.
Mr Chair, I'd like to speak to supplementary order paper on the foreign investment provisions of the TPPA Amendment Bill. This supplementary order paper proposes a deletion of Clause 69. Now, Clause 69 would insert a new Section 61A, and that section would give powers to the executive that we believe should be reserved for Parliament. What it does is it basically takes away the powers of Parliament to determine the rules around foreign investment regulation. I think this is a particularly problematic part of this TPPA Amendment Bill. As we have discussed with previous speakers, the Green Party does not agree with the ratification of the TPPA as a whole. But even if it went through, we would be deeply worried at the loss of democratic scrutiny and parliamentary scrutiny over the important issue of regulation of foreign investment. There is, as members of the public and members of the House know, considerable public interest in government approval of foreign investment and growing public concern. Foreign investment of New Zealand's iconic landscapes, of agricultural land, of primary production, of value chains and strategic assets. The foreign ownership of New Zealand's assets is increasing, although we would decry the lack of proper analysis and a database to show that clearly. We believe it is wrong for democratic oversight of that investment to be taken away from parliamentary scrutiny under this amendment. So this supplementary order paper proposes to delete the amendment that would remove these parliamentary powers. So let's look at why we might want to have maintained public and parliamentary scrutiny over foreign investment in New Zealand. Members of the public know that there has been deep concern over foreign purchase of residential homes, for example. The right to restrict foreign investors from purchasing New Zealand residential homes would be essentially ruled out under the TPPA. But there are many other aspects of foreign investors that give rise to concern. The journalist Rod Oram wrote in an expert paper analysing the TPPA about the loss of control of agricultural value chains. And the problem is that if we cede control over value chains, for example, infant formula, to foreign investment and foreign ownership, then essentially New Zealand producers get locked into the role of low-value commodity production without the means of owning the full value chain and without the ability to be able to strategically direct New Zealand's future in agricultural value chains. This is a recipe for New Zealand to be locked into a low-value commodity producing role in the economy. There are many other reasons that foreign investment may want to be restricted. For example, in the episode where Schedule 4 of the Crown Minerals Act was threatened to be opened up by the government, there was concern from industry that would be restricting foreign investment. And industry said that that value locked up was $200 billion, a figure then repeated by the New Zealand government. So that locking up, so to speak, of mining assets, which is in fact on conservation land, could be the subject of challenges for foreign investors on the basis that it would restrict their access to New Zealand's resources. That is exactly the kind of restriction that we think the New Zealand public needs to have a voice to ensure. Mr. Speaker.
Barry Coates.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chair. There has been debates also over strategic assets such as Auckland Airport. There is public concern over the use of New Zealand's groundwater. There's public concern over the sale of agricultural land, iconic places. And what we're seeing internationally is that agreements like the TPPA that introduce a mechanism such as investor-state dispute settlement opens decisions of governments up to challenge in an international arbitration panel that has shockingly bad judicial process. And that is very dangerous because these decisions are being decided above Parliament. They're being decided above New Zealand's judiciary system. We are opening ourselves up to key issues that affect the functioning of democracy to be decided in an international tribunal that can override our democratic processes. And we look at some of the cases internationally, and some of them have been mentioned by my colleagues, but they haven't talked about the most recent case, which is President Obama being sued over the Keystone XL pipeline, carrying tar sands from Alberta. And they're being sued by TransCanada for $15 billion US. So we see the size of some of these agreements. We know that, for example, Occidental Petroleum took the Ecuadorian government to ISDS and was awarded $2.3 billion over oil drilling in sensitive lands, both for Indigenous peoples and for ecological fragility. We've seen the case that Quebec has been sued by the US company Lone Pine Resources for $250 million over their moratorium on fracking because they wanted to do further research on the implications of fracking on geology and the groundwater. And they were sued under ISDS for $250 million. These are the kinds of cases that New Zealand may well face under ISDS. We've heard previously that these cases have not yet occurred for New Zealand under agreements that we already have signed. But the agreements we've signed are with countries that are not nearly as litigious as the corporations from the countries we are about to sign the TPPA with. For example, I don't think Brunei's corporations are about to take New Zealand to ISDS, but the US corporations have been highly litigious in using mechanisms like ISDS to take countries like Canada to an international tribunal. So therefore, under the TPPA, we would not only be losing parliamentary oversight of foreign investment decisions, we would not only be delegating that to the Governor-General by order of Council, which is a key loss of parliamentary scrutiny, but would then be opening ourselves up to challenge by multinational corporations over decisions which were taken by this Parliament and which could potentially cost New Zealand an enormous amount of money. So, Mr. Chair, I think what we've seen from the New Zealand public is a very loud no to this agreement. The most credible public opinion poll in November last year said that 60% of people who have an opinion on the TPPA reject the TPPA. That's 60% of the New Zealand public. People have been asking for a referendum on this agreement. This is a vitally important agreement for New Zealand's sovereignty. It's a vitally important agreement for our economic future, for our right to regulate. And I would say to the Minister, when he says that the right to regulate is protected, he should read out the whole sentence which says, we reserve the right to regulate except where it is inconsistent with this agreement. And it's the kind of skating over the reality of this agreement that we've seen far too much of. I would say Mr Chair, that this agreement should be rejected. The Green Party rejects it. We reject it because it's not in New Zealand's interest. Thank you, Mr Chair.